Welcome to the Equity Teacher Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rachael Mahmood. In this podcast, we'll dive into the stories, the voices, and the expertise of incredible teacher leaders who are making a difference through the equity work they do in their classrooms and their communities. Welcome back to another episode of Equity Teacher Leader. I am super excited for our podcast today because we have the 2025 Illinois Bilingual Teacher of the Year on the podcast with us today, Jessica Suarez-Nieto. I am so excited that we get a chance to talk because I've wanted to interview you forever. You are doing amazing, amazing things. How are you? How are you doing?
I am doing well, maintaining our resilience despite all the challenges.
Tell us a little bit about where you teach, how long you've been in education, and then we'll jump into a fun discussion.
Awesome. So I teach at the which is a school in Little Village. So I teach in Chicago, and it is my 11th year of teaching, and I've been jumping kind of like around between being a math teacher, being a special ed teacher, all of them being a bilingual teacher, or all those experiences, and also like a history teacher. So I've been grounding myself of doing like work that's interdisciplinary in those areas.
Yeah, that's amazing. And actually, that's one of the first things that drew me towards you. And just hearing your story, the way you bring your educational content to life, like, just celebrating the identities of your students, it really spoke to my heart. And let's start with your story because you do have a very interesting story of like your school experience. I read that you became a teacher after witnessing oppressive systems and conditions in your schools, that you said, specifically, I want to provide students with experiences that encourage them to question such systems and build alternatives that uphold our humanity. I mean, I just got chills rereading that out loud from an interview that you did. Tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up. What's your story?
So I grew up working class family with folks, that we valued education, and not necessarily because it was a way out of being like a working class, but we valued education because of the collective commitment, right? My mom always says like, it is what do we contribute to our people? How do we continue to do that? And at the same time, I grew up in a single household family, so I saw the challenges that posed also. But within even like education, I also noticed that my human existence was something that the school system did not value. And that started at a young age, right? Like
Wow.
when I was in second grade, being in a situation where me speaking Spanish was not something necessarily seen as valuable, but rather like you need to learn English, right? So I think that was one of my first traumatic experiences because Spanish was all I knew. And I wasn't sure that I was ready to let go of the language that connected me to my homeland, that connected me to my family, and more importantly, my mom. And then as I got older, I decided to be a math teacher because the math high school teacher that I had, right? Like not just in terms of different race, but also her inability to see that even though I was going to be a teen mom, like for her, somehow that became something that I was unteachable. I sensed that in many instances that we had interactions, right? And not only her, but other people in the school I was in. So it did not make me feel very human, right? It made me feel a sense of disposability and then people getting to determine what that was. So in my reason for teaching was more like, well, I want to have experiences. I want my students to experience alternatives that they are valuable. Their cultura matters, that where they come from is as important as what we're trying to build. And I think it's just finding those interconnections and alternatives for them to see that they don't have to change who they are to be able to fit in, but really see how much of an asset they bring into the learning space.
No, I absolutely love that. I definitely can empathize with you about the feeling of like invisibility, like in our school system. And I think school has this powerful way of teaching us a very simple lesson. You belong or you don't belong. And it's in all the little things underneath the surface that kind of speak to us, or I say oftentimes whisper to us, you belong in the space or you don't. And I can definitely relate to that feeling of school constantly sending me micro messages. You don't belong here. For me, it was more of like curriculum violence because it was more of the idea of the curriculum never represented me, my identities never represented my background, my history. And so my identity was just completely invisible. So it was almost like the null curriculum. For you, it sounds like it was like just like the outward messages that you were receiving because of your identity.
Yes, and definitely even the status quo of like what people of color can do or cannot do. And I
Mm,
think the older I got, even at a university level, I was just like, this is following me everywhere, not just within like elementary or high school, but it posed challenges being a person of color who had to take remedial courses because, the undereducation of people of color, right? I think like those had challenges even at a university level.
wow. Yeah. And then the bias, right? And then negative bias against your identity, against the challenges you had against being a teen mom. Like, it just like compounded your oppression or like the oppression that you faced in school.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, just such a powerful story. I feel like there's two kinds of people coming to education. There's the kind of people coming to education because like school was amazing. School was like their happy place. School is like they want to be just like all the teachers. They love learning. School was built for
Mhm.
their identities. They were validated and affirmed every step along the way that they were going to be successful in school and that it worked for them, right? And then there's those of us who come into teaching because it was the exact opposite. We come because the system hurt us, it broke us, it didn't serve us correctly. Like we come with like this super strong why story. We're here to disrupt the system,
Yes.
and we come in. I think that our why stories are difficult sometimes to navigate because I say that when you come with a really strong why story into education, then it's almost like if you can't fulfill it, if you can't live it out, if you can't change the system, there's like all this internal pressure on you and you question, why am I even here?
No, for sure. I can connect to that. The not enough, that we don't always do enough.
Yeah. Like we're always trying to disrupt something because we came to like
Mm,
change the system. All right. Something that I love about the way that you're changing this system is this idea of like culturally responsive math instruction.
mm,
So funny. When I became a teacher, I was like, okay, I'm going to build the backgrounds and identities of my students into their lessons. And because I taught elementary, I taught all the subjects. So it was super easy to be like, yeah, let's read books about your culture. Yeah, let's learn the history of like your people. But then I got to math
mm.
and I taught math like from the textbook, like the way you're supposed to teach math, I thought, right? I'm like, it's algorithms. It's not a place to embed identity. And I guess that's another reason I was really drawn to your story because I was your age and then some before I realized, like, hey, we could change the way we teach math too, that there is a place for identity in math. I guess let's start with like talking about like, what does it mean to be culturally responsive? Like, how would you define that? And then how would you define that in terms of mathematics instruction?
Yeah. I think I always wrestle with the fact that it's both like being responsive and then also like how do we make it sustaining, right? Especially mathematics, because I feel many people will come and be like, oh, it's apolitical. And I was like, actually, it's a very political. Like my existence as a woman of color teaching mathematics is like, it's a very intentional political statement to make that it's not just that white men get to do it or that the institution, right, gets to determine who is qualified to teach it. I pull from people who've done this work like Rico Gatstein, David Stovall, like different people who have done this work to say like how do we actually engage it. And one of the lessons that I first did when I taught like eighth grade math in my first years of teaching was like buying a house black and brown, which is a social justice lesson that was created by Rico Gatstein and somebody else, Bill, I forgot their last name. But it was like, what does it mean for us to actually buy a home? And is it sustainable? Encompassing, right? Like the different situations that people of color have, like the economic access, also academic access to wealth and all these different things. So for me, it's like, how do we make it relevant for our students? Or even thinking about the algebra lesson where kids are thinking about like, okay, if this is the minimum wage that most of our families get, can this actually allow us to buy things? Or like how are we being taxed when we have to buy uniforms or different things? And it's really like, how do we use mathematics to understand the injustices in the world as females, right? Like the fact that we still live in a country where we have periods every month and we have to pay, and these companies are making so much money of us because it is something we actually need, so it has become like a commodity for folks to profit off of. And that was a lesson that I would do with our students in our classroom, and we would compare, well, go to the store And like we would make a list of like, what are the products that men and women, quote unquote, buy, right? So pads would be one, racers. So I was like, go to the store and compare the price of racers for men and for females, right? And they would notice, they're like, wait, why is it more expensive? So like thinking about like marketing and like, why is it more expensive for others? So like, I feel as kids come in and every year it would be something different that kids would like alleviate to. Like in the past years, my last class has been talking about Puerto Rico, right? When we started up talking about Puerto Rico, it was this idea of like, well, we want to understand debt. How do we understand Puerto Rico's debt, even though it's a US colony owing money to the US? But then also, how does that connect to payday loans that our families sometimes takes, right? Like, what are the connections there and what are the implications about this type of predatory like loan practices that people have fallen into?
So when you're doing these lessons, I'm back up just for a minute. So because you just shared so many different ideas and now my mind's like, so like when you're doing these lessons and you're trying to build the identities and backgrounds of the students and like what are the topics that are interesting to them or they may be relating to? And then how do you like put that in like a math context? So like those are all great topics, but where's the math that's happening in those topics? I guess I kind of wonder about that. Like if they're going and comparing women's products to men's products and prices, what's the math that they're actually doing in that?
So it depends. We could do unit rates, the unit rate, or like the how much does it cost yearly. Like another lesson that I also did is like we could do unit rate, but another one about like stop and frisk policies in New York, like during that time that the police was doing like all of those. We actually use unit rate to find out how much is it per hour that they're stopping people of color, how much is it per day, etc. But not only that, then we were able to use percentage. We had to use the percentage of the people that were actually innocent to like the people that actually did it, and then based on race, right? So like predominantly Black folks were the kids were able to engage in the mathematics and then be like, wait, this actually is not making sense. Like what's being reported or the policies are impacting predominantly, and kids were predominantly like people of color, and kids were able to use mathematics to actually understand. Like even a kid has like, he's like, wait, Miss Jessica, this is like our whole like middle school class size. In an hour, we would all be stopped, right? And that's like the math sensing that kids get to be like, this is intense, right? I usually do this thing called curriculum circle. So like I try to gauge what are kids interesting or what do they wonder. And then from there, it's co-created with the teacher and the students where this year, as they get older, they get to, if this is what you're interested, you're going to research it and you're going to teach the rest of us about it. And then I link some mathematical as my expertise of math into the topics they're interested
Oh,
to
it's so interesting. So you give them the math language and the math algorithms and procedures to better understand the social injustice that they're curious about and wondering. So you're like, okay, you feel like this is unfair. Let's use math to figure out how unfair it really is. And so if somebody's like, oh, I think it's unfair that women's beauty products are more expensive than men's beauty products, then you might say, okay, well, let's use unit rates to figure out if that's actually true, or let's use percentages to figure out if that's the case and exactly how big that unfairness is. That's fascinating. So, like, is this like the core curriculum, or is this like, like a passion project that they have that carries them throughout the year that they're working on?
Yeah, it's definitely not part of the curriculum. I usually use like extension lessons or project-based opportunities for kids to like, for us to go into a deeper dive to like connect the different learning.
Okay, so I'm definitely getting the culture responsive piece because that's the part where you're having these circles. What did you call them again?
Curriculum circles.
Curriculum circles, and you're basically investigating where their passions lie, where their interests lie, their identities, and like how you can use that. That's the information you're gathering, correct?
Yeah.
And then what's the sustaining part? Explain to me how I go from culturally responsive, like responding to their interests, to like the sustaining. And how is that different than culturally responsive pedagogy?
Yeah, I think the difference is how do we get students to not just sit with this? For example, we're talking about in Chicago, we have local school councils, everybody has school budgets. There's things that kids want to change in their school. How do we start making them be engaged, and how does money come into the schools? Who makes those decisions to start actually changing? And in the past, I had kids like organize. So kids organized and said, we actually want money that's in the school budget so that you can fund a 6th through 8th grade topic, because in the neighborhood we live, we are, and our families have been victims of police brutality. And that really made kids be organized and get clear on why this money being spent would actually be something that can be transformative. It was
Mhm.
transformative in the sense, and I feel like that's the part about like sustaining. How do we sustain that interest and to say like we need to make certain changes because our community is being impacted, and this is how we do this collectively, and how do we start pushing people in power to actually make some of those changes?
So I feel like culturally responsive is like understanding their identities and how we respond with our curriculum to like engage them, versus sustaining is almost like they're in their driving seat of that. And now it's like they've taken ownership of it and they're continuing the process through advocacy or through some type of action.
Yes.
That's amazing. And that's definitely going to keep them engaged in math. I think, one of the things that I did learn about when I was learning about culture responsive teaching, everything is just like the weaponization of math, right? And a lot of people talk about how math is used to perpetuate inequities, how people try to use math to make things more complex so that they can protect the privilege of some people, or in order to then, maybe take away some opportunities from other people. I remember reading about how the idea of like three-fifths, like when Black people are considered three-fifths of a white person, and like how they use math to perpetuate that narrative. I also think about the way we use math and statistics, right? How we can flip a statistic, right, to convince somebody, because people think, well, you have an opinion and then you have facts. And people automatically think that if math's related, it's a fact, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can't argue with it. So then they use math to perpetuate an agenda, and that agenda is not always there to help people. The math is not always objective.
Yes, no, for sure. And we actually do this thing called data talks. And as the year goes on, I'll be
Mhm.
putting different data facts. And I was like, data can always, and I tell us, data can always be construed to prove a point they want to prove. And the question is like, what is it not telling us, right? So it's like, what is the data not telling us? What is like the other side of the story? Because always data has different stories, right? And what is the impact of this story? Yeah, I feel that mathematics and this work can be done across like younger children. It's always like people are like, "Oh, how do we do it with younger children? How do we get it?"
Right.
And like as a SPED teacher, I got the opportunity because I was doing SPED for math as well, to be able to try it with like first graders, right? It was
Show me how that would work with the first grade curriculum, because, I teach fourth grade,
uh-huh.
and I'm really interested in even just doing data talks
Hmm.
with fourth graders.
Yeah. So one of the lessons, like I told you, there's this one book called Mathematics for Social Justice. I can send you the link of what that book is.
Yeah.
But in one of these lessons is the 10 shares of inequality. So like for example, fractions, like things into so there's 10 chairs, 10, 10, 10. One of the things that we would do is like, okay, if in a perfect world, like there's 10 people there and 10 chairs, what would that mean? One person per chair. But when we talk about the connection about the wealth, right? Like if we talk about wealth, that's not necessarily the case, right? So part of the assignment, like, or part of the lesson to do that, was like, okay, the truth of the matter is that the global majority of folks do not own equal share of the wealth. So then visually what kids had to do is that 7 people had to fit in like 2 or 3 chairs. And then one person had other 7 remaining.
They're like laying down like
Yeah. Yeah.
across like all the
Yeah.
chairs.
With all the chairs. So like for me, that's always a quick intro to like understanding like pieces and equal sharing, but then also having like a reality check of like if this is what the world that we live in. And right now, like that was a lesson I did like years ago. Now the numbers are probably way significantly because the amount of wealth control by like the ultra rich has gone up
Yeah,
insanely.
no, that definitely is a very powerful lesson. I'm always thinking about people saying, well, social justice lessons are great for like older kids, right? But then they're like, is there really a place for social justice for younger kids? I actually give a presentation all about how you can bring in social justice topics in early childhood education. Like, there is no age requirement to have deeper conversations with students about equality and inequality. I always say, all you need to do is sit down with a preschooler and give one kid two M&Ms and the other kid one M&M, and he's going to say that's not fair.
Mhm.
And then that is your It is your opening intro to talking about justice. Justice means fairness. And let's talk about why it's not fair. And we can talk about a lot of things about life being unfair for people because of their skin color, life being unfair because of their gender, life being unfair because of where they live or what language they speak. That's a very easy social justice lesson to have with early childhood students. And then to build off of that and then use the math to maybe paint that picture of unfairness, I think is definitely amazing. So I was thinking about kind of all these things that you said, and I'm trying to like put everything together from like my elementary school brain. Like, how would I implement all of this or some of these ideas? I could definitely see having like a math curriculum circle or a curriculum circle to find out about my students' interests and identities. I already do this thing called a passion project where my students research something they're passionate about. Anytime they finish an assignment early, they're always working on their passion project. And I've never thought about adding a math component to it. Like I've always had, like they have to research something, they have to produce something, make something, there's reading, writing, and like, synthesizing involved. But now I'm thinking about like, how can math be involved in something like that? And this data talks that you're talking about, um, I'm thinking about you're starting a math unit.
Mhm.
Who can't throw a statistic up there at the start of a math class, just like you do a number talk and just talk
Mhm.
about that statistic? What does it mean? Who would be excited about this statistic? Who would be upset? Like who holds the power to write this statistic? I love that. Who does it benefit? Who does it harm?
The first couple of data talks that I had was I didn't give data. So like I gave the data, but I didn't give the title. And the kids had to figure out what is this data representing. And the
Mm,
data was regarding like school suspensions. So
mm,
they knew they had some knowledge like, oh, it's gonna be related about school suspensions. And it was like predominantly like it was race was the other thing, like the breakdown of race. And then the kids had to be like, okay, what questions do I say? What is it not telling me? What piece am I missing? So like, but they noticed they're like, okay, predominantly Black students and Latino students are the ones that are getting in school suspension and out of school suspension. And then I was like, what age do you think this data is from? And they're like, oh, there has to be like middle school or high school, only to find out it was kindergarten. And they were,
wow.
what? How do you suspend a kindergarten? And like back in the day when schools were just suspending kids, right? And we didn't have some intervention in place to not suspend kids. But this really brings out a lot of the questions that kids then start to investigate. They're like, wait,
Yeah.
how can we learn more? What do you mean some kids get suspended? In whose eye does this require a suspension?
And it gets them all excited and passionate about a topic and wanting to learn more through math. I love that. Is there like a place you go to find some good data that you could share or like how to talk about it? Do you have a resource that you could share around that? Because I'm really interested in that. I'm already getting ideas for Mondays. Like,
It depends on the topic. I'll research data and it's just me trying to research or find, like, for example, one of the things that kids are really interested right now are regarding the amount of funding immigration is doing. So like I'm always searching like how is the breakdown of the big beautiful bill that just got passed? How is that being used? Right now, I get to show like that data for the students and then they get to interrogate it. Like 2 weeks ago, we actually did a breakdown of the amount of beds, right? Like, because we're trying to make connections between like this prison industrial complex and then talking about the deportations and like who's making money off of this, right? Like
yes,
there
who's
is always a
benefiting?
connection. And then kids were like, how is it that they're making this much money?
Right.
And why are we funding more and more? So in the amount of deportations, because companies are benefiting from detaining our people, whether or not we're documented or not, we are seeing that if you look brown or you speak Spanish or you don't belong, like we are being taken, our people are being kidnapped. Right. So I
Love
feel
that.
like those are the things that, and then also how do we draw from struggles? Because right now, like our thing is like, how do we see the connections that even though we are in a predominantly Latino community and ICE is hitting us targetedly, how do we connect our struggle with like the struggle for Black Lives Matter, right? The struggle against police brutality. How do we connect our struggle to Indigenous struggle? The fact that Indigenous folks were removed, that land from Mexico was stolen and given to this country, right? Like, so like all of these different things. And how is this being replicated around the country? I mean, not
Yeah.
around the country, but also around the world. How is the US also doing this in other places? And I think that's the connections that kids are also trying to draw on. Like, where does our money go to? Is our money that we spend on certain corporations funding genocide? So like, those are the things and connections that students are making and also becoming more aware.
And critical. I mean, you're teaching them the criticality in looking beyond things and not just believing that math is a fact and then like it becomes objective. You're showing them how to be critical of the numbers that they see, the statistics that are out there, the lies or truths that we're told through numbers, through media, through the government, through our school system, right? And so when these numbers get published, they don't just sit there and think, well, that's a fact. There's nothing I can do about it. They start questioning that, and that deep level of thinking, that criticality is just such an amazing and important skill for them to have to be good, socially just members of our community. When you're doing all these different types of lessons, I always think about my critics. People are always like, oh, there's no time, or we got to teach the core curriculum because if we don't, kids are not going to make progress, especially when you work in a title building. I have felt that crunch for real, especially when you work with students who are not meeting academic standards. People love to tell you that you're actually going to do more harm to the students by doing these types of extension projects because they're going to get further behind. But that's not the case, is it? You have had some amazing results with your style of teaching. Tell us a little bit about the results that you've experienced with all these projects you're doing. Has it improved math instruction or math scores in your classrooms?
Yeah, so definitely, like throughout the 11 years, there were some years that I think it's easier seen if there's a cohort of students, and we can see that there's definitely the connection of like improvement of test scores. And I think that's also attributed to like students taking ownership, right, of their learning, but also their interest in trying to make sense of it. And that it is not just this idea of like memorize these formulas, apply them, and then move on. I think it's also a pedagogical and philosophical questions that we as teachers have to take and take a stand against this apolitical sense of like teaching, right? Because I was like, when people say it's like, oh, I'm neutral in teaching, I was like, there's no such thing as neutrality. We take a clear stance on what we're doing. We either are on the side of the oppressor or we are on the liberating side. And I always say that to teachers, like, regardless of your intention and whatever things you think you know, like the way we teach and how we teach has serious implications in the lives of our students.
I believe when we teach on the liberation side, our students are liberated enough to actually achieve at their potential because we are not further oppressing them.
Yep.
I know, like for me personally, I've seen a lot of success with my students' test scores. The more project based I get, the more I'm connected to their passions, their identity, their culture. Students'
Mhm.
test scores just seem to go up. Have you also experienced that?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that right there is also a great case for people that are like, I'm worried about not having enough time. I always say, I don't know what my kids are going to grow up to be. I don't know if they're going to be doctors or engineers, mailmen or teachers, if they're going to work in a store, they're going to work in the White House. But I do know they're going to grow up to be members of a community. That's my focus, to raise the best members of a community. Like that's the guaranteed,
Exactly.
like, and
Exactly.
so that's priority number one.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
I mean, that is so crucial.
You've given us so many things to think about. Like, I'm actually getting excited about doing my lesson plans for Monday, which I mean, to get somebody excited about lesson planning for Monday. If I wanted to get started, like right now, somebody, a listeners out there is like, okay, I want to get started. I want to start to integrate some culture responsive or social justice topics into my math instruction. Give us 3 tangible steps that we can do, dipping our toes in that water and like moving towards that type of instruction.
I think the easiest one is to start gauging what are your students. One, like gauge what are your students interested in, like what is their justice topic that they're interested in. Then
That's that
step two,
curriculum circle you
that's
talked
a
about, right?
yeah, like, or even well, yeah, that's prior to the curriculum circle, but that's just like, let's have a circle. What are we interested in exploring or trying to learn about? And it's just getting topics. From there, I would say data talks. Like find a piece of data that connects to it and start building what can kids start asking questions about this? Like, is this fair? What are the implications? You know, like I think that's the other one. And then the next thing is, can you use your students' like interest? I think that's where the curriculum circle starts. What can it be, and how do you as the educator with the expertise like be able to support that kind of learning experiences with them and co-create something? And if you can't do that yet, then I would really recommend even looking at books of people who have created social justice lessons that you can start testing in your classroom. Like
Yeah.
that 10 shares of inequality, I think it's a good lesson to even just try to get them to understand math and injustice in the world.
I love that. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? Like, let's start by using some great models that are out there. And I'm definitely going to get those book titles from you and put them in the show notes, and so people can look at that and then start with that. I mean, I love that idea. Now, is there a book that we could read or an article about how to do a good data talk? Or are you going to write one for us? Or is
I
that going to
hope
be the
maybe it could be something
book
I
idea? Book alert.
maybe, hopefully. I know there's math book talks, but I honestly, I've just done my own way of data talks, which is
I
something
don't know. Jessica, I think this could be like an avenue for a good book. I'd buy it. I'd buy it. I'm already there.
hopefully talking
So
humors.
Yes, yes, we're
Empathy.
gonna will it in, and in 1 year from today, you know, we're gonna bring you back on the show, and we're gonna talk about your book on, like, how to have data talks in
That is
justice
a
and
great idea.
justice in Huh?
That's a great idea, even with some examples that I've used.
Yes, we need all the examples so that we don't have to think of them ourselves. What are the questions we're asking, and what do kids do with it after that?
Mhm.
Yes, very exciting. So I have to ask you this question before we go because you are the 2025 Bilingual Teacher of the Year for Illinois. And I just, you know, in that bilingualness, I love the asset based, you know, lens that you put on everything and centering students' identities. But coming from being a representative of bilingual teachers, what do you think is the biggest change that we need to push for in education right now to support students who are bilingual, who are multilingual, who are living these identities to make sure that they have the most equitable educational outcomes that they can possibly have? Like, what are we fighting for?
I think, I mean, in Chicago, I'm seeing a shift. One of the biggest things is we need to move away from monolingual English settings with like bilingual teacher supports, but truly be moving towards diverse language. Like some schools might have more than three languages, right? But even if we can just start making a lot of the schools dual language to support and honor students, because I know that in different districts, it's not just like one kid that speaks a different language. And it never hurts us to learn multiple languages. So I feel like really moving towards dual language supports for students and schools, but also like additional funding. Like how are students able to be bilingual, fully bilingual, or multilingual in some cases? How do we also honor like the different languages and support all students? And I think for me, that is like something essential so the kids don't feel like they ever have to sink or swim to learn English or to be able to fit in or have to assimilate.
No, that
So
makes so much sense. And it's crazy because, like, everywhere else in the world, you are learning a second language from kindergarten, right? And then in America, one of the most language rich,
mhm,
diverse countries in the entire world, we don't have
mhm,
that system. We have no second language from birth or from, you know, elementary
yeah,
school. Like my husband went to school in Pakistan, he learned English from kindergarten.
mhm,
You know, my dad, where he went to school, it was Telugu, Hindi, and English. They were doing three languages from kindergarten. You know, I nephew who goes to school in the Netherlands, he speaks Dutch, French, and
wow.
English. You know, and how do we push towards like this idea of dual language identity being something for everybody?
Sure.
It's an asset for everyone.
It shouldn't be like wait till high school and you'll try to learn something because language has been proven that it takes 5 to 7 years. We only
I
go to high school
forgot
4 years.
all the French I learned in high school. I'm going to be honest with you. I have very little French left. I can't conjugate any verbs. I can't make any fluent sentences. And I took 3 years of French. You would
Yeah.
think,
I mean, I try,
oh,
and this is language is always something that I'm very passionate about because I have taken like Italian classes, Chinese Mandarin classes. I'm taking Nahuatl, which is the indigenous language like of my people in Mexico. And it's like, oh my God, now I feel like I have to catch up and run and try to do something with the limited time. But it's like, how do we also recognize like the importance of like all of these different languages as a way to also connect to other people around the
yeah.
world?
That's amazing. And our 2025 Illinois Teacher of the Year, Victor Gomez, which I did interview him in my last podcast, he's working really hard on just that asset based lens about dual language, about being bilingual, and how important that connection is to STEM related careers since he's a chemistry teacher. But I know that's also something you've been passionate about. I've seen it published before, it's out there in writing that you are also passionate about students from bilingual backgrounds having all those opportunities in STEM related careers as well. So I hope you and him are connecting as well, because I
That's
know he's
right.
starting the Monarchs, which organization for bilingual teachers in the state of Illinois, to have a greater network of sharing resources and building their collective power and influence and knowledge. So that's just a great initiative. All right. I have one final question before I let you go, before we end this podcast. I asked everyone this in season one, and you are my final guest in season one of the Equity Teacher Leader podcast. So if you could create a student success playlist of a song or a quote or a story that inspires you to keep on teaching. I always joke if we got this far in the podcast and people are still listening, or we're all just looking for some motivation to get up tomorrow and do it all over again. What inspires you to keep on teaching?
And I have to say it in a quote or something.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Or
Well, what inspires me? Well, I can start. Like for me, is this strong sense of liberation, and the love for our people, right? Like I will say it over again. We need to be able to have a society in which all of our humanities are recognized, that we are acknowledged, and that we are seen as valuable. Building really alternatives when those things don't happen. And I know one of the biggest things for me also, like I actually was thinking about some of the quotes because I always tell my students, I was like, home is not just my place here in Chicago, right? Because I would feel like actually this does not feel like the homeland that I belong to. But I always tell them, it's like, there's this quote from Gloria Anzandula who says, I am a turtle. Wherever I go, I carry home on my back. So really like thinking about that connection about like home. And then because I'm a Bad Bunny fan and I love Bad Bunny and my kids know I love Bad Bunny, his album, the last one, Debí tirar más fotos, if I could think of the playlist of everything that embeds like who I am and what I'm fighting for, I would say that whole album is like one of the things that connects me to my motivation. This year, even I started doing this bulletin board that Debí tirar más fotos, and throughout the year, we're snapping pictures and Polaroids with my students about like those key moments and why that matters. So I would say like that is like my motivation to constantly think like, how are we doing it? How are we transforming? And how do we hold on to those memories?
That's so amazing. That's such a great connection and a great idea for a bulletin board. I'm also thinking about incorporating something like that into my classroom now that you mentioned it. I haven't done my student success playlist with any of my guests this whole season, but I'll share it with you. The Pink Floyd song that goes, "We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control, no dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave those kids alone." Is like literally the reason I teach. Like this idea of schools have been this factory for like creating these students who are just on this assembly line, and we're just pushing them through with workbooks and like this
Mhm.
segmented thing. And like, I just want to be the teacher that disrupts all that. My kids are beautiful. They are whole. They are smart. They're intelligent. They're passionate. They're creative. And I don't want school to kill all those beautiful parts of their identity. I don't think we need to like polish them all away. I think we need to help them find and live within their authentic selves and find their gifts and their talents. And like, we don't need any more bricks in our wall. Like, we definitely don't need any more dark sarcasm in our schools. We need to, school needs to be a place of liberation. So kind of have a very similar philosophy to you about,
Mhm.
making school a special place for every student to discover who they are and all the best parts of their identity and their love for lifelong learning. It has been so amazing to talk with you. I knew that when we started this podcast, I'm like, I will walk away with a million ideas from you because you've inspired me long before this podcast. Just everything that you've been working on has been truly inspiring. And there is no doubt in my mind that you are an equity teacher leader just because of how much you love your students, you embrace their identities, all the connections that you find to those experiences, how you fight, not only for justice for your students and our community, but for your students to be the type of people that can continue that fight in our communities from a young age, to be amazing members of our community that we should all be proud to live next door to and to show them their own self-worth, in the system. I mean, it is just, I'm tingling. You are an equity teacher leader. And so thank you.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It's amazing to connect with like badass people. I don't know if I